what an episode. I'm going to get to that in a moment. As always, I'm Al. This is the Geek in Review, and I'm going to be talking about The Last of Us Episode 3. So if you haven't seen it, this will contain spoilers, and if you haven't seen it, you have to see it. This is amazing. So I'll be perfectly honest, I was a little bit on the shelf, and I mentioned this in my first two reviews, that I wasn't really buying into the hype or The Last of Us or getting it. You know, it was good, but it wasn't really doing anything that I hadn't seen before. It reminded me of a lot of other apocalyptic stuff. The visuals were a little bit of The Walking Dead as well. And I thought that maybe this show, while good, maybe wasn't for me. But my god, this episode 3 completely hooked me in. It's one of the best TV episodes I've ever seen, and I'm not just talking about this show. I'm talking about maybe in the last few years. Other than, I think it's episode 6 of The Sandman, the episode where you meet Death. This is just phenomenal television. This episode is greater than the show so far. But let's get into it. So again, this is going to contain spoilers, and it will be your final warning. So yeah, a great episode. It didn't really focus too much on the main characters of Joel and Ellie. We did get some new faces popping up, and a lot of them, and a lot of backstory that comes with it. And again, I'm shocked how good this episode was, especially considering it wasn't really focused on the two characters that we've been introduced to in the show so far. But it's the performances in this episode and the storytelling that finally got me on board with this show and the potential for it. Because, again, I've not played the games and I don't really know too much about it. I've seen a little bit of footage, but not a lot of it's in context. But I'm going to say that none of this was in the game at all, especially the depth and the backstory of these two characters of Bill and Frank. But we also didn't get a flashback intro this week. So they dropped the flashback intro this week, and I'm glad because it did feel like it was going to be a little bit gimmicky. But the entire episode itself is a flashback, and then is sort of catching us up to where these characters are when it comes to Joel and Ellie in the storyline. But yeah, this episode picks up exactly where episode 2 left off. Joel and Ellie have escaped the city, and I like that they're now out in the country. It feels a little bit different, and as I said, a little bit less Walking Dead sort of situation to me. But this episode is all about relationships, and not just Joel and Ellie, but the two characters, Bill and Frank, that the majority of the episode covers as well. And yeah, I like that Joel, he's not really stuck with Ellie, and Ellie sort of calls him out on this. Is this awkward scene at the start where she says, hey, none of this is my fault, you agreed to make a deal, this is part of the deal. So essentially she was saying, grow up and get on with it. And although Joel isn't actively showing it too much, you can tell that he's absolutely devastated with the loss of Tess, even though he's come to accept it because he doesn't want Ellie talking about her or referencing her. But remember, in the very first episode, in one of the very first scenes, Joel lost the morning. Joel lost the most important thing to him in the world, which is his daughter. This guy has just now come to accept loss and then quickly deals with it. And yeah, this episode's more about the initial bonding between Joel and Ellie, because I do think that I've not really felt it in the first few episodes between these two characters. And I did wonder, how were they going to sustain the show for another 4 or 5 episodes with Joel and Ellie just walking places? It was just going to be a different threat every week. That wasn't going to be very exciting. But this episode does dive deep into a lot of things, and starting off, we do get a little bit of a backstory about what happened between the time of the infection and when everything sort of collapsed in society. Because Ellie asked Joel how it did spread so quickly and everywhere all at once, because remember, we've seen planes dropping from the sky in episode 1 at the same time people were getting infected on the ground. And Joel explains that the fungus must have got into the food supply somehow, most likely through something like grain or flour. So anyway, this is where sort of Bill's story starts with a flashback in 2003. We see his town getting evacuated by the government, but he's a survivalist that's decided to stay in his bunker, and he does sort of come up trumps, because once everyone else is out the way, this guy really gets to town and knows what he's doing, and he's having the time of his life, reinforcing and defending his neighbourhood. And this is where he meets Frank. He's basically the survivor of a group that's trying to make it to Boston that gets caught in one of Bill's traps. And this is where the episode completely changes, because from here on out, there's almost no mention of the fungus. Yeah, they're still dealing with the collapse of civilization, but the whole threat of the cordyceps and everything else isn't really mentioned throughout the rest of the episode. So Bill takes in Frank, and he's pretty generous to him, and it's nice to see that, there isn't always, or at least there's maybe a lighter side of survival. And I thought instantly here that this story mirrors Joel and Ellie's, that they're two people that are just kind of thrown together and they have to connect. But man, once that dinner's out the way, do they move fast. And I mean, I know it's like a last man on earth type situation, but what if one of them wasn't the other one's type? I mean, Jim bods not dad bods kind of thing. I'm not judging. I'm just saying that if I was the last person on earth and encountered someone else, I wouldn't automatically assume that I was their type if it was going to come down to that sort of thing. But hey, maybe that's just me. But yeah, the storytelling after this just goes to the next level. We see how these two guys fall in love and live and build. And I'm not going to go into it too much because honestly, I think you have to go and watch this episode of television. Even if you're not watching The Last of Us, the acting and the writing and the performances here are just top notch. These guys are going to win awards. I mean, I knew Nick Offerman was a great actor. I loved him in Parks and Rec. I knew he could act, but I didn't know that he could act to this level. And it is just absolutely crazy how much you care about these two characters who didn't know each other before this event, and how much you care about what they're up to. I mean, they could probably do an entire spin-off show that was just these two guys living together and people would watch it. But for all the sort of good stuff in the acting and everything in this, I did feel that the scene with Joel and Tess, once they showed up, it did feel very civilised for the end of civilization. They were very clean, their clothes weren't that worn out. And even when Joel warns Bill that trouble will find them eventually, and it does, it's nothing too serious. The majority of this episode is spent with these two guys, and we see what they got up to over 20 years. And in this period, they were only attacked once. I find that a little bit hard to believe. I get why they only showed us the one scene. They couldn't just show us attack after attack. It would be a little bit boring. Plus, the scene where you think that Bill's been shot and he's going to die was pretty tense. Because, again, I've not played the game, so I didn't know how any of this was going to end and who was going to live and who was going to die. But yeah, because I haven't played the game, I didn't know who lives and who dies. But I was kind of shocked and pleasantly surprised when we get the time jump to seeing them when they're a little bit older. And Frank is sort of suffering some sort of disease. They don't go into it specifically, but he's now decided that, he wants to end it, and he wants to end it on his terms. And I'm not going to talk about it any more than this, because again, you have to go and watch it and see it for yourself. It's amazing. It is absolutely one of the best televisual things I've ever seen. Once you've recovered from all the Bill and Frank stuff, it does pick back up with Joel and Ellie who have showed up. And that's kind of it for them. There's a great bit where Ellie's in the car and it kind of blows her mind because she's never been in one. And I love the way that Bella Ramsey plays it. She's really good with that sort of wide-eyed wonder. And she continues to impress me every week. And I like how they bookended this episode with Joel and Ellie and just focused on these other two characters, because what this episode is showing is the potential of how they can tell a story in this. Because again, this is a post-apocalyptic world, and how entertaining can it be to watch two characters walk down a road and talk while they're going on a side quest? So the fact that they're taking an episode out here and showing us what they can really do and the level that they can really do it at really impressed me and has definitely got me on board with the show. Let's say I wasn't hooked by the first two episodes, but if the level of quality is even going to be half this good, I'm going to stay tuned for the rest of the season. It's already been commissioned for a season 2, which isn't going to be a shock to anyone. but there are only 2 games, so the question is going to be long term. If this is a huge moneymaker for HBO, are they going to go beyond the original source material, which was a bit of a devastating blow for Game of Thrones? Or are they going to go down the route of spin offs or something like that? As always, we're going to have to wait and see. I'm sure it's no shock to you that I absolutely loved this episode, but I want to know what you think in the comments below. So let me know, and if you've made it this far, please leave a like on the video, and if you've not done it already, please subscribe to the channel. It's only one small click for you, but it means the entire world to me. As always, I'm Al, thanks for watching.